Good afternoon. And I'm delighted to announce that I got my baggage. So I'm actually wearing, yay, I got clean clothes. And for those of you who were in a pool and bet that I would not get it until I went back to the US, well, you lost. Yeah, sure. Just use this? Okay. So this panel is about how important it is to have investors and how key they are to scaling all the work that all of you are doing. And I know that when we look at investors, and I love my investors here, but when we look at investors, we think of them as a different breed, that they think differently, they come in, they want all these metrics from us, they have all these questions about our business models, and here we are, very simple people, designing technology-based products, solutions, applications that we know has real impact. But the thing that the world has learned, when you come at it from an entrepreneurship point of view, is how critical it is to have commercial investors and their view of how scaling occurs. And since our topic is about impact investing in scaling for the SDGs, so it's really about taking ideas and how do we scale it to large-scale impact. So that's the focus of this panel. Yesterday, when I was tweeting around and asking people what questions they had, etc., people were asking in terms of what is an impact investor? Are they they could be a commercial investor who's looking at different kinds of impact. They could be an investor who's put money into a foundation that is looking at how they invest in the kinds of work that we do. They could be growth investors, they could be seed investors, and we are very fortunate today to have three types of investors here, three very experienced investors. Ritu Varma, who comes from Ankur Capital, Ankur, the seed stage and the early stages of investing. We have Santosh Ramdas, who comes from the Dell Foundation. And if you've been following the news, last week, Michael and Susan Dell announced that they added $1 billion more into the foundation. And in order to, and they go all the way from grants to seed funding to growth capital, etc., and focus in India, US, and South Africa. And then we have Abhishek Gupta, who comes from Caspian, and they are really looking at how do you deploy commercial capital into scaling impact, into the growth side. So he comes at it from a growth investment and actually started in looking at financial institutions in the microfinance area. So you'll hear from them all the different kinds of investments that can occur, from grants for nonprofits to seed investments for early stage to debt instruments, something that we as running companies or in technology don't think of debt as a really positive way of getting commercial investment. And then going on into growth investors and growth investing as the companies grow. Also, very fortunately, they are in different sectors, agri-sector, and in focus areas, education, livelihoods, and I know you have a breadth of investments. And looking at financial, agri, and health, and environment that Abhishek will be talking about. So it's really an exciting time because impact investing to date has been very heavily focused on the microfinance and the financial institutions. And now in the last few years, and especially today, is growing heavily into the sectors like agri, health, environment, education, and livelihoods with major investments. So really fortunate to have these three investors on the panel. And I would like to start with Ritu Verma to talk about a few minutes. Each of them will talk for a few minutes, and then we'll do we've got some questions from the audience, and we'll put some questions around, and then you can participate in it as well. Thanks.
Does that work? Okay. Thank you, Radha, for that introduction. So as Radha said, I'm Ritu Verma. We run a seed stage fund called Ankur Capital. And the focus of the fund, or the investment thesis that underlies what we do, is to support really early stage or seed stage companies with funding. And our focus investment theme is to look at how technology, especially the digital penetration, but also product innovation in India, combined with rising aspirations and the large market for the next billion. And innovations in this is what we invest in. So that brings us to sectors in agriculture, healthcare, education, and also something which we call technology for access. So there could be possible technology solutions that bring people in more rural or remote areas online, or participating in markets, but don't quite fall in the other three sectors that I mentioned. So those are our focus areas. We look at very, very early stage companies. Typically, people have made one sale when we actually invest in the company. Our funding goes up to about $1 million at max. And what we like to say, more than money, because our companies are very early stage, that we bring in capital plus. We actually have a dedicated team that focuses on bringing in support for building out the organizations, because we are usually at a technology or a proof of concept kind of stage. We are usually not investing when the team and the company has developed further. We have about 10 portfolio companies. It is a bit ag heavy. So we have about 5 ag tech and food investee companies. They range from looking at digitization of agriculture, to looking at cold chain transportation, to looking at sustainable inputs for soil. So it's a pretty broad range, and including food, Hyderabad-based company that looks at smart climate risk food for people like you and me. In healthcare, we have technology-led access, which is looking at bringing digital healthcare into remoter areas. We're also invested into a breast cancer detection company that uses machine learning and brings in a no contact, no radiation, early stage detection company. So it's a broad range. We are co-invested with MSDF here in a skills training product company. So it's a wide range here that we have. But the core underlying thing of all of these companies is they either have a product innovation or are using digital penetration here to actually bring better services to the markets that we're interested in, or bringing products and goods out of those markets more efficiently.
Thank you, Ritu. And Santosh, you represent the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation that has between $2 and $3 billion of money that has gone into the impact sector, ranging from grants to equity investing, and would be really good. And you're big in US, India, and South Africa, so you have a lot of international experience as well. So it'd be really great. And of course, you're our investor, so we love you dearly. So
Semi-Arid is the first investment that I made at the foundation, and I could not have been more prouder about a company that is just phenomenal, from a testament to what impact can look like. And if you all don't know, go find out from their booth, and it's phenomenal. So yeah, I work for the private foundation of Michael Dell and his family. He's the founder of Dell Technologies, used to be called Dell Computers. Our mission is to improve the lives of children living in urban poverty. It's a specific mission, and we are exceptionally passionate about it. We think about it every day, and it drives us. What it translates into is a significant portion of our work focuses on improving education outcomes for children. But in India, we also have a wider focus focused on improving the lives of families living in urban poverty, because better families means better children, better lives for children. And so we have exposure to livelihood programs, improvement in incomes, skills training, employability, workforce development, but also financial inclusion in improving the financial lives and their ability to manage money better. So that's the wide range of our portfolio. I'm going to spend like maybe a minute or two talking about our principles and what we believe in. Before that, I think one of the things that really distinguishes us is we're kind of like a Swiss Army knife. And I think Radha hinted this, and that kind of is a distinct way for a US private foundation to behave and act. We've set up a practice that we find a meaningful entrepreneur, a promising entrepreneur, and an innovative idea. We'll find the tool to fund them, whether it's equity, debt, grant making, contracts, and whatever stage they're in. So we've kind of built a very nimble practice that's very much like a Swiss Army knife, and it's a rare luxury for us to being able to do a wide range of investments. And each of the investment officers at the foundation manage grants, equity, debt, and there's a significant amount of cross-learning and ability to kind of look at the world in a cohesive manner when you have the power to do that. Our impact investing portfolio specifically is about $40 million so far in terms of a balance sheet, and about 30-odd companies globally. And we're one of the few folks in the market who have actually gotten exits. We've gotten out of 3 or 4 companies. One of our companies has gone to a significantly large IPO. So we've had a decent track record. So in terms of what we believe in, and I think this is kind of the values that we stand for, one is I think we're very obsessive about the entrepreneur, and we think that the fundamental change in building successful organizations and products and companies is going to come from phenomenal entrepreneurs. And so we find people with a strong sense of business acumen when they're building companies, but also people who are passionate and committed about impact. And I think Radha is a testament to that, and she stands for every single value we believe in. So that's one of our core values. The second is, and we've started learning this even more, is that we are obsessive about also doing things beyond just giving money and engaging with companies more closely from a capacity perspective. We recently did a survey with all our grantees, and we asked them, if you had a choice of getting $100,000 extra from us or meetings with 10 key level decision makers that can fundamentally influence your business, what would you do? About 60% of the grantees said that they actually wanted the key level decision maker introductions rather than the $100,000. It was a really eye-opener for us, because we also realized that we could really add value beyond money, and we kind of believe in the way we work and our practice and the way we engage with our companies. The last, I think, is the most interesting, is also we see doing impact investing as a privilege. As a grant maker, as a tax-exempt private foundation, it is our responsibility to ensure that every dollar that the foundation chooses to deploy really magnifies impact and improves the lives of children living in urban poverty. So when we make that choice from making a grant to an impact investment, there is a significant amount of scrutiny in ensuring that our principles and values are preserved. And that privilege is something that runs across the organization and core to our DNA. So I'll leave it at that and then maybe come back to more questions.
Thanks, Santosh. And I have to tell you that we feel very fortunate to have investors who, as you said, it's not just about the funding is very important, but it is a lot more than the funding, and we'll talk more about that. Let me turn to you, Abhishek, you work at Caspian that's like 13 years old, right? And you have a lot of experience in investing you started a lot with the financial institutions and microfinance companies, and you have a lot of experience investing in growth stages. So could you share some of your experiences, and then of course we'll open it up to questions after that in terms of what is not working and what you look for. But please share with us your experience.
Sure. Thanks, Radha, and thanks for the opportunity, and good to see so many great people here. Just to start off with a little bit of a background on Caspian. Caspian is a 13-year-old investment management firm. We are a commercial investment manager, but we've set up 4 different funds, 3 of which are equity and 1 is a debt fund. All the 4 funds have a specific focus around making investments into companies that have some form of social or positive environmental impact. And like Radha was saying, we started off with microfinance 13 years ago. And we've had the privilege of making investments in the seed stage and taking the companies all the way up to the IPO over the last 13 years. Across the different funds, there are different agendas in terms of at which stage we'll invest in. At this point of time, we have 3 funds which actually invest in the growth stage, and that's where my personal experience comes in. I lead the debt business at Caspian. What we do in Caspian in terms of investing, and as far as investing into technology is concerned, just to give you a little bit of a background on that, we don't look at technology as a sector. Our approach is rather like, so we invest across financial inclusion, food and ag, agri, of course food and ag, healthcare, clean energy, education, and so on. So the way we deal with investments is make sure we understand each of the sectors really well, tech, non-tech, whatever be it. And of course, technology, as far as we are concerned, is an enabler. It's a means to a different end. The end essentially is more efficient supply chains, whether it's a product or a service in any of the sectors that I mentioned. So then what we do is we end up looking for companies which build technology solutions to basically address the supply chain issues in the different sectors I mentioned. Just to take a few examples, so we invested in a dairy company which does the simple job of collecting milk from farmers and then selling it in the, selling products in the urban locations. Once we did that, we realized there was a lot of supply chain issues. So then we invested in a technology company, a dairy Internet of Things company, which tracks data right from the point of milk collection until the sales, or at least the production phase. So they would track where the milk is going, what is the temperature, and so on. So basically trying to address issues of perishability. Coming to perishability, we invested into a company which aggregated and sold high-quality carrots and vegetables. We then invested into a cold storage company which was making micro cold storages which could be set up at the farm level to basically make sure that the perishable products don't go waste before they reach the customer. Similarly, we worked with in fact, we've invested into the largest organic food products company in the country. We realized that one of the key elements of that is to have no chemicals in the process of cultivation. So we supported a company which makes non-chemical pest control products. So that's on the agriculture side. On the healthcare side, we've looked at companies which provide primary care using a tech backend which basically helps them deliver health care without depending on doctors always. We've invested into a company which is building a telemedicine chain on top of a secondary care hospital chain. In the clean environment space, we've invested into companies which basically have worked on developing products which replace harmful chemicals which are used in in the industrial context, like say textiles industry and so on. We funded a lot of these companies which build alternate sources of, so basically technology to generate energy from alternate sources, alternate as in alternate to fossil fuels. So solar, biomass, to basically generate electricity or power or energy for different purposes. We've also looked at the clean environment aspect with a slightly wider mandate. We've looked at companies which develop energy efficient applications or products. It is using electricity, all good, but then how can you reduce the consumption of electricity? Can you build the building in such a way that you reduce the consumption of electricity in a building of this sort maybe? So those are the kind of areas that we've invested in. And of course, a lot of them are early stage. We basically, through our debt investments or equity investment, the idea is that we invest at a stage and then basically transition the company into high growth. Of course, they would be high growth in a lot of instances, but basically transition them into the next level where the impact of whatever they're doing, all the examples that I mentioned are super high impact areas, right? the impact of what they are doing grows multiple fold if they can grow their business several times. So that's basically our role, make the investments, try and help build the network or the connects, and see that the company itself evolves into a much larger organization and has a much larger impact in the areas that they operate in. So I guess that's...
Thank you. I think as people look at investors, and it was some of the questions that were raised in the last couple of days as I asked around, what are the things you're interested in? Question I have for you is, when you look at a potential investment, let's say you're a growth investor, you're a commercial investor actually, that's looking at the impact of what you're investing in. Or yourself when you're looking at seed, what do you look for in, I know that you were saying earlier, the technology is one aspect of it and that's important. But all three of you talked about the importance of building sales and marketing, networking, and many other aspects of processes and operations that oftentimes, as entrepreneurs, as technologists, as tech entrepreneurs, we kind of feel that's the sexy part is looking at the technology, but it's looking at the other parts of it, which are so critical. So I'm going to this is not directed to any one person, so please jump in and talk about this. You guys are very articulate earlier, and feel free to disagree with each other. So go at it.
I guess no worries. Since I'm the growth investor, I guess I
called yourself the villain, didn't you?
Yeah. So I guess I get a little bit more bothered about things beyond technology. So how are you building the organization, how the institution is getting built, how can you scale it up so that the technology solution that the company has built does not remain just an innovation or a technology, So when we look at a loan, for example, and when I say loan, I think as far as we are concerned, we are able to provide a very vast wide variety of flexibility in terms of what the kind of loans that we can provide. And just to tell you, loans does not just mean 3-year, 5-year amortizing loans that you have to repay on EMIs. There can be several other versions of debt that can be provided, and that's the kind of a value add that we provide by understanding the kind of needs of the company and hence provide the appropriate debt solution. Now the things that, going back to the things that I look for, so I need to look for a company that will sustain and be able to repay the loan. At the end of the day, it's not given for free. It has to be returned and with interest, and there is a specific timeline, whether it is monthly, quarterly, annually. There is to be a defined, pre-agreed timeline on how the money is going to come back. So I need to look for a company which has a defined marketing and sales plan, a defined way of having internal controls in place, a defined way of making sure that all the transactions, financial, non-financial transactions that are happening is decent. And also that the company is not just about one entrepreneur, the techie, but also about the second line of management, which basically strengthens the ability of the tech entrepreneur to be, scale up his product or scale up his company. So all of these companies and a bunch of others, but the things that I mentioned is kind of the key. I guess there would be some other things that Santosh or...
So we are a little different because we're a seed stage investor, so technology does get us excited. So we are looking for that innovation. We do get excited about it. And once we've gone through our diligence of figuring out, okay, this is something that we're interested in, it is about building the organization and building the company so that technology actually makes it out to the market. So yeah, it might sound boring, but in our experience, we've found that building out the team and a lot of things that Abhishek spoke about, that these are all absolutely critical things. And if you don't build those out, the technology is going nowhere. And to build out your sales team, to build out internal processes, we have a spend a lot of time, looking at financial stuff in the company, financial processes. Do you know what's happening if you're physically manufacturing goods? What's happening in the company? How is that working? Is your sales and marketing team able to go sell? How does that efficiently go sell? How do you build the team out beyond? Usually for us, it's either one or two people who have come who have done something. So we look at the capability of these people to actually hire and build out an organization. But we do also look at the technology to start with, because that's the stage that we are at, right? So you've got an innovation, you've got something that the market wants, right? And then how do you take that, which is what we call the seed stage, to the next level of saying, how does this build out to be an organization? How do you build out the networks? How do you build out, how do you sell this stuff? How do you get customers? How do you build more innovation in the company? And that's how we look at it.
So I'm going to throw in a slightly different perspective. Not contrarian, but slightly different in a sense that I think the challenge that we've had and the failures that we've had is not thinking about access, usage, and last mile distribution effectively when we went into investments. For instance, we invested in a micro savings company that had a very cool technology that could acquire or collect and distribute money for on behalf of banks at a very small cost using biometrics and all that. While in a lab, the technology looked phenomenal. It worked seamlessly, frictionlessly. You take it out to the real world and it's superbly messy and everything went wrong that could go wrong. And 6 years on, it's still hard to get that business model to work. We've learned, so this is not rare examples. It happens over and over again. But at the same time, in the last 3 years, we've seen only an increase in the number of investments that we've made that have a significant play from a technological perspective. What we started looking at is not just people who are phenomenal from a tech perspective, their abilities, but also people who can figure out the messiness of the real world and see how they can get their products into the hands of consumers and get them to use them effectively. And I will say that increasingly we look at B2B companies, and many of you in the room, for instance, are B2B players, service providers for other companies, or might have a tech stack that can help them deliver better services, agricultural weather. And I think another challenge we've had with B2B companies is, again, they think that if they can get the product to sell, then they're done. In fact, I think we've had instances where lots of products have sold and people have bought it, but if the consumers in the end don't end up using it, and if there is no long-term value, the product is not going to sustain. And I think that's also another lesson is you got to put the user in front of everything else. And that's our obsessiveness about technology.
That is also how the impact happens. If it is not used, then the entire foundation of impact investing, the impact doesn't happen. Yeah. And then all the investments you made are not going to go anywhere. I want to take this discussion specifically into the agri space, because there's a lot of history in terms of the impact investing in financial institutions. But when you invest in agri, which is a lot of the people here have that interest, we talked about the fact that moving from the microfinance focus or the financial institution focus into agri is quite a tough thing to do. So I know you both in particular have done quite a bit of that movement, and that agri there are many subsectors in it. There is a lot of scale in agri to scale big, and thereby impacting the SDGs in a big way, but it's also many, many, many little subsectors. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we obviously invest quite a bit in agri. Agri is a very, it's good to say agri, but if you were to divide that up, it would be full of a lot of other subsectors, each subsector which could be larger than another sector that you might look at as investing. It is also, at least in the Indian context, and I think globally this is true, it's a very complex, it's been around for ages. There is a lot of government and political interventions in how agri works. So there are complexities of how within agri and within each subsector of agri. So for investors in this sector, it is extremely important that they get their hands dirty and they sort of understand where they're getting into, because it's not a brand new thing and you're saying, hey, look, I'm going to go do X. Here, you may do things differently, But there is a status quo, and it's important to understand where status quo is, both for the investor and the entrepreneur here. So, however, it's a very exciting sector. There's been sorry, I should not say this. There's been a lot of technology. There's been a lot of R&D in terms of inputs and seeds, etc. That has happened, and that has brought us to where we are. But there is obviously a large scope for change in this sector. And in the Indian context, the use of technology, specifically software, and as the cost of the last mile access and knowing what's happening on very distributed, fragmented, small farms starts coming down, there's room for great change in how agri works here. Plus, we all need to eat. We have different food needs. We have growing food needs. The protein consumption in this country is going up. We want some exotic vegetables that have traditionally never grown in India. All sorts of things are changing. And as a result of which, we truly believe that the consumption and the forward consumption is actually going to drive the changes on the back end in agri. So scaling a business should be extremely possible. There are probably areas that are difficult to work with, but there definitely are newer areas and newer ways of working in agri that we're very bullish about.
With food security being so critical in definitely one of the focus areas of the SDGs, the scaling becomes equally critical in order to be able to get to that food security, which is part of what you're investing in. What's your experience, Abhishek, in terms of from an impact?
The sustainability of the scaling as well, right? So we've had the green revolution in the past, and perhaps we didn't think enough about the ecological consequences of some of those things. So I think scale in agriculture, scale in sustainability hand in hand is a very critical thing.
Yeah, that's probably one area, agri, where the scale and sustainability are most important. Because otherwise you do not get to the large volumes you need, and neither are you, as you said, with the green revolution. The sustainability is not there.
Yeah, I guess in general, the experience, specifically with agri, has been that the gestation periods are much longer than you would have traditionally expected. You go in and then you realize that this is going to take some time. So that's I think a big realization. And the joke is that I tell people I read and study more about sectors now than I did in college. So you can imagine how much understanding needs to go into understanding each of these sectors before we make loans or make an investment. So, and it's complicated, like Ritu was mentioning. There's a lot of government influence in whatever we are doing. Intentions are good, but if you provide subsidy, you basically are trying to do good, but you're also distorting a market. So, those things is something that we need to deal with.
I have an example of actually not far from here in Anandpur district. Part of what happened is the Green Revolution. It was an introduction of a cash crop, of getting into groundnut, right? And without understanding the consequences of what it did to the water table. So it took out millets, which was the more traditional thing that grew in semi-arid areas, replaced the cash crop, which all was very well-intentioned, but the water table today is at such a disastrous level because of that, somewhere it's not sustainable. It's just not a cash crop anymore for the region.
So part of the discussion we were having earlier is how agri-investments bring in, as you just explained, environment into it. It brings in the financial instruments into it as well, because you have to do microfinancing, you have to help farmers or whoever is in the agri-tech. It brings in networking, it brings in logistics, supply chain. So part of the discussions we were having earlier is how investing in agri has all of this whole ecosystem that becomes a part of it. If I turn to you, so much of your work is in education and livelihoods. So could you talk about how that has been different and in some of the successes? I mean, the ed tech has gone up, come down, gone up, come down. So, and things that have worked with companies that you've worked with. Yeah.
So the messiness of agriculture is fairly similar in any other sector that, again, has similar tenets of complex systems. Financial services is the one example where probably there's been seamless investment by impact investment firms in companies, and they've seen significant growth in IPOs. But beyond that, every other sector seems to have a lot of friction. And education is something that we're learning rapidly. So we're probably the most prolific impact investor when it comes to education in India, where we care about particularly low-income learners and improving quality of education in K through 12. And once you open that Pandora's box, you realize that it is not only just significantly complex, but it also has a wide range of actors. So one of the things that we struggle with in India is the diversity or differences between the public and private systems. So the private schools in India, affordable private schools, low-fee private schools, operate fairly independently, and then the public school systems is fully state-funded and operate independently. So our investments today don't kind of overlap in India. A lot of our investments in the public systems are mostly grants and large-scale transformation projects with state governments. And most of our private investments / impact investments are in the affordable private school market, where there is a market, there is changing of money, and there is a financial transaction. In comparison, for instance, in the US, we've made a few education investments, and these are companies that are very embedded in the public systems. So they're directly delivering services or helping teachers improve educational teaching levels in classrooms. So I think that's the biggest challenge when you look at emerging markets, is that the public systems are not sophisticated enough to have high quality players come in and interact. And we would love to see that, but I think the separation of two poses a challenge in India.
So we're kind of at the tail end of the panel, with less than 2 minutes left. And I want to just ask each of you this question. So do you think we're at a stage where investment for impact is at a very exciting stage to scale and become really sustainable and grow in large ways? Or do you think that this is sort of a ho-hum state, we're still testing this out? Or do you think that this is actually not as exciting and going forward? So you can say whatever you want. I haven't asked you this question before. So where do you think this is?
Yeah, sure. I think we are at a very exciting point, primarily because we've discovered that this is a meaningful instrument for scale that is unprecedented. And even in our portfolio, we've realized that just being able to invest in sustainable, high-quality entrepreneurs can deepen and scale the impact beyond our wildest dreams. So that is not going to take away our excitement, and this is true for the wider sector. And you can see that in the levels of money and interest and funding that's coming into impact investment. That being said, I will leave you with a word of caution, and this is true for both investors and entrepreneurs. I think one of the biggest pitfalls is to put this impact investment and this frame of sustainable private companies into things that are not right for impact investment. And we seem to sometimes have this one solution fits all perspective on this, saying, yes, let's hive it off, let's start a private company, or let's try to look at impact investment as a solution. And I think we just need to be significantly cautious that there is still going to be significant levels of philanthropy that is focused on things, and there's going to be things that are not impact investment ready. And there are segments of population that aren't going to be active, fertile participants in markets. And this is the reality of the world we exist in. And I think it's significantly important for everybody to recognize that, because I think our own mistakes have always been in places where we've forced an impact investing kind of framework into a solution that is actually not ready for impact investment. And that's my kind of cautious word.
We've been given the and since both of these ladies work at iMerit, I just want to have you guys take one sentence.
So we think, we look at it as sectors, and we think these are sunrise sectors. So I think that scale is to come, and it will come. And they're such critical sectors that there's, those solutions, those companies will be built.
We're very excited. We see a lot of opportunity, and I think slowly the way in which the investors and entrepreneurs work together, I think that understanding is also evolving. They are understanding that it's not us and them, it's us as partners. That's the mindset shift or slight change that is happening, and I think that's great. So, yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Radha.
And it was pretty exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you.